The crowd's roar died to a stunned silence as Maya Rodriguez crashed to the canvas, her 98-pound frame crumpling like paper against the ropes. Blood trickled from her split lip as referee Patricia Wells counted her out for the third time in 6 months. The jeers started immediately from the packed gymnasium. Glassjaw Maya strikes again. Someone shouted from the bleachers. Couldn't punch her way out of a wet paper bag. Another voice added with cruel laughter. Maya's opponent, a hulking 140-pound amateur named Brenda the Bulldozer Kingston, stood over her with barely concealed disgust. "This is embarrassing," Kingston spat, pulling off her gloves. "I've hit heavy bags that put up more fight than you. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." In the corner, Tommy Williams shook his grizzled head while wrapping up his training gear. 20 years of coaching had taught him to spot natural fighters from a mile away, but Maya Rodriguez was starting to make him question his own judgment. The girl had heart, technique, and speed that most boxers would kill for, but something was fundamentally wrong with her power. Every punch landed like a gentle tap. Every combination fizzled out like a damp firecracker. It defied everything he knew about the sweet science of boxing. Maya pulled herself up using the ropes, her legs still shaky from the knockout blow. The taste of defeat was becoming too familiar, coating her tongue like bitter medicine. She'd been boxing seriously for 3 years now, training 6 days a week at Iron Heart Gym in Chicago's South Side, dreaming of the day she'd step into a professional ring and make enough money to move her mother Rosa out of their cramped Pilsen apartment. But dreams don't pay rent, and her recent string of losses was making it impossible to book even amateur fights. "Maybe it's time to consider a different path, Mia," Rosa had said gently the night before, her cleaning uniform still damp with hospital disinfectant as she counted out bills for groceries. "Boxing is a young person's game, and if it's not working..." The words hung in the air like smoke, unfinished but understood. Maya's younger brother Carlos had stopped coming to her fights altogether, too embarrassed to watch his sister get repeatedly humiliated in front of crowds who'd started betting on how quickly she'd go down. The gymnasium slowly emptied as Maya gathered her gear, each person who passed offering either pitying looks or dismissive shakes of their heads. She'd gone from local prospect to local joke in the span of 6 months, and the boxing community in Chicago wasn't known for its patience with underperformers. Eddie Santos, a veteran trainer who'd been working with fighters for 30 years, paused near her corner with his arms crossed. "Listen, kid," Santos said, his voice carrying the gravelly tone of someone who'd seen too many dreams die in boxing. "Rings. I've watched you spar, seen your technique, studied your footwork. You move like Sugar Ray Robinson and train like Rocky Balboa, but your punches..." He trailed off, searching for diplomatic words. "It's like watching someone throw marshmallows. Maybe it's genetic, maybe it's psychological, but power isn't something you can learn. Either you're born with it or you're not." Maya nodded politely, but inside her chest, a familiar fire burned hotter with each word of doubt. She'd heard it all before from coaches, opponents, and well-meaning friends who suggested she try softball or track instead. The problem wasn't her technique or her conditioning. She could outwork anyone in the gym and had reflexes that made seasoned fighters jealous. The mystery was in her fists, which seemed to carry all the devastating force of butterfly wings, no matter how perfect her form or how much she believed in each thrown punch. 3 months later, Maya's world changed forever during what should have been just another routine sparring session at Iron Heart Gym. The late afternoon sun streamed through the gymnasium's dirty windows, casting long shadows across the worn canvas where she was working with Jake Morrison, a middleweight prospect who'd agreed to help her prepare for an upcoming amateur tournament. Tommy Williams watched from ringside, making notes on a clipboard and occasionally calling out adjustments to Maya's stance or timing. Jake was holding back significantly, as most sparring partners did when working with Maya. At 180 pounds of solid muscle, he could have ended the session in seconds, but the unspoken rule in the gym was to let Maya work on her combinations without fear of serious damage. She danced around him with impressive footwork, throwing clean punches that would have looked devastating to an untrained eye but landed with all the impact of gentle taps. "Come on, Maya, put some heat behind those shots," Tommy called out though. His voice carried more resignation than encouragement. "Pretend Jake owes you money or something." The few other fighters training nearby chuckled at the familiar refrain. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Everyone in the gym had tried to unlock Maya's power over the years, using everything from meditation techniques to dietary changes, but nothing seemed to work. The sparring session was winding down when Maya noticed something strange about her. Gloves. A small tear had developed along the padding near her right knuckle, and through the opening, she could see what looked like tiny white granules spilling onto the canvas. Jake noticed it too and called for a break, pointing at the unusual sight. "Hold up, your glove's leaking something," Jake said, touching the mysterious substance with his finger. The granules were odorless and felt slightly gritty, like fine sand or crushed aspirin. Tommy climbed through the ropes to investigate, his experienced eyes immediately recognizing that something wasn't right about the equipment Maya had been using. "Where did you get these gloves?" Tommy asked, examining the damaged padding more closely. Maya explained that they'd been a gift from Commissioner James Mitchell after her first amateur victory 18 months ago. Mitchell had presented them personally, claiming they were custom-made training gloves designed specifically for developing fighters who needed to focus on technique rather than power. Tommy's expression darkened as he pulled apart more of the padding, revealing small packets of white powder sewn into the knuckle area of both gloves. The substance looked pharmaceutical, precisely measured and distributed throughout the striking surface. Jake stepped back instinctively, while Maya stared in confusion at what was clearly not standard boxing equipment. "I've been around this sport for 20 years, Tommy said quietly, his voice tight with controlled anger. "I've seen every kind of equipment modification imaginable, but I've never seen anything like this. Someone has been deliberately sabotaging your training, Maya. These packets are designed to absorb impact, making your punches feel weak to both you and your opponents." The revelation hit Maya like a physical blow. Every embarrassing defeat, every mocking comment, every moment of self-doubt suddenly took on a different meaning. Someone had been systematically destroying her confidence and career, making her appear powerless while she unknowingly wore equipment designed to neutralize her natural ability. The betrayal felt personal and calculated, suggesting a level of planning that went far beyond simple hazing or practical jokes. Tommy immediately called for a pair of standard training gloves from the gym's equipment locker. Maya's hands trembled as she laced them up, 18 months of suppressed frustration and humiliation boiling over into pure determination. Jake volunteered to test her power with the new equipment, holding up heavy mitts and bracing himself for what they all hoped would be a dramatically different experience. Maya's first punch with the unmodified gloves sent Jake stumbling backward 3 steps, his eyes wide with shock. The sound of impact echoed through the gymnasium like a gunshot, causing every conversation to stop and every head to turn toward their corner of the ring. Jake flexed his fingers inside the mitts, checking for damage to his hands from the unexpected force. "Holy hell, Maya," Jake breathed, shaking out his arms. "Where has that been hiding?" The other fighters in the gym began gathering around the ring, sensing that something significant was happening. Maya threw another combination, and this time Jake had to plant his feet and engage his core muscles to avoid being knocked off balance entirely. Word spread quickly through Iron Heart Gym that Maya Rodriguez had somehow transformed from pillow-fisted amateur to legitimate knockout artist in the span of 5 minutes. Fighters who dismissed her for months suddenly wanted to spar. Coaches who'd written her off began taking notes, and the atmosphere around her shifted from pity to genuine respect, tinged with curiosity about what had changed. But the discovery of the sabotaged gloves raised darker questions that nobody in the gym was equipped to answer. Who had access to Maya's equipment? Why would someone go to such elaborate lengths to damage a relatively unknown amateur boxer's career? And most importantly, what other aspects of her boxing journey might have been similarly manipulated without her knowledge? Tommy spent the rest of the evening making phone calls to contacts throughout Chicago's boxing community, trying to understand the implications of what they'd discovered. The more he learned about equipment tampering and fight manipulation, the more concerned he became about Maya's safety. Someone with significant resources and inside knowledge had targeted her specifically, which suggested motivations that went far beyond simple sports rivalry. Detective Lisa Chun received Tommy's call at 9:30 that evening while reviewing case files in her cramped office at the Chicago Police Department's Sports Corruption Division. Chun had been investigating irregularities in local boxing matches for the past 2 years, following paper trails of suspicious betting patterns and unexplained fight outcomes. Tommy's story about the sabotaged gloves was exactly the kind of evidence she'd been hoping to find. Equipment tampering isn't just cheating, Chun explained during their meeting the next morning at a coffee shop near the gym. It's assault, fraud, and potentially racketeering if it's part of a larger pattern. The fact that someone went to these lengths suggests we're dealing with organized crime, not just a corrupt coach or jealous competitor. Maya listened to Chun's assessment with growing unease. She'd entered boxing to escape the violence and unpredictability of street life, not to become entangled in criminal conspiracies. But the detective's theory made uncomfortable sense when viewed alongside other strange incidents from Maya's recent career last-minute fight cancellations, opponents who seemed to know her exact strategy, and medical examinations that always seemed to find minor issues requiring treatment. Chun's investigation over the next week revealed a web of corruption centered around Commissioner James Mitchell and his connections to Victor "the King" Kozlov, one of Chicago's most powerful boxing promoters. Kozlov had built his empire by controlling fight outcomes through a combination of bribery, intimidation, and increasingly sophisticated forms of cheating. Maya's sabotaged gloves were apparently just one tool in an arsenal designed to manipulate results for maximum profit. The betting records Chen obtained through federal warrants showed consistent patterns of insider knowledge around Maya's fights. Large sums of money were being wagered against her by individuals with direct connections to Mitchell's office, suggesting that her poor performance was not only expected, but essential to someone's financial strategy. Maya wasn't just an unfortunate victim of corruption, she was an active revenue generator for criminals who profited from her engineered failures. Marcus Thompson, a data analyst who specialized in sports corruption cases, joined their informal investigation after Chun reached out through professional contacts. Thompson's background in computer science and statistics made him invaluable for identifying patterns that would be invisible to traditional police work. His analysis of Maya's fight records revealed algorithmic precision in the timing and severity of her losses. "This isn't random," Thompson explained, showing them charts and graphs on his laptop. "Someone has been carefully managing Maya's career trajectory to maximize betting profits, while keeping her just successful enough to remain viable for future manipulation. Look at these numbers. She loses exactly when large bets are placed against her, but wins smaller fights when those same betting syndicates need to establish credibility for bigger scores." The mathematical precision of the manipulation was both impressive and terrifying. Maya's entire boxing career had been reduced to variables in someone else's profit equation, with her dreams and aspirations serving as mere window dressing for a sophisticated criminal enterprise. The emotional impact of this revelation was almost harder to bear than the physical effects of the sabotage itself. Tommy's anger at the situation had evolved into something approaching rage as more details emerged. He dedicated his life to developing young fighters, believing in the fundamental honesty of competition and the transformative power of athletic achievement. Discovering that his own gym had been used as a venue for systematic fraud felt like a personal betrayal of everything he'd worked to build. "We're going to expose these bastards," Tommy declared during a late-night strategy session in his cluttered office above the gym. "Maya deserves justice, but more than that, every young fighter in this city deserves to know that their efforts matter, that their victories and defeats are real. If we let this slide, we're telling every kid with boxing dreams that they're just pawns in someone else's game." Chun nodded grimly, understanding the broader implications of their discovery. Sports corruption didn't just damage individual careers, it undermined public faith in competition itself, turning athletic achievement into elaborate theater designed to separate gamblers from their money. The Chicago boxing scene was relatively small, but its influence extended throughout the Midwest, making this investigation potentially significant for federal authorities. Maya spent sleepless nights wrestling with the decision of whether to continue fighting or walk away from boxing entirely. The sport had been her refuge and her hope for a better future, but now it felt tainted by deception and manipulation. Part of her wanted nothing more than to return to the simple dream of honest competition, while another part burned with desire for revenge against those who'd stolen months of her life through elaborate lies. The answer came during a training session where Maya sparred with Amy Foster, another female boxer who'd been struggling with similarly inexplicable performance issues. When Amy mentioned that she'd also received special equipment from Commissioner Mitchell, the scope of the conspiracy became clear. Maya wasn't the only victim, she was part of a systematic campaign to control outcomes across multiple fighters and weight classes. Discovery of the broader pattern gave Maya the motivation she needed to continue fighting, but not for the reasons she'd originally entered the sport. Boxing was no longer just about personal achievement or financial security. It had become about justice for every fighter who'd been manipulated, every fan who'd been deceived, and every young person who needed to believe that hard work and talent could overcome corruption and crime. The decision to fight back would prove more dangerous than any opponent Maya had ever faced in the ring, but it would also reveal reserves of strength and determination that no amount of sabotage could diminish. Part 2. Survival and Awakening. Maya's transformation from unwitting victim to determined fighter began with 3 weeks of intensive retraining using legitimate equipment. Every morning at 5 a.m., she arrived at Iron Heart Gym to work with Tommy on rebuilding her confidence and technique without the artificial limitations that had defined her previous 18 months. The difference was startling. Punches that had once felt like gentle nudges now landed with bone-jarring impact that surprised even experienced sparring partners. The psychological adjustment proved more challenging than the physical one. Maya found herself hesitating before throwing combinations, her muscle memory still programmed for the dampened feedback she'd grown accustomed to with the sabotaged gloves. Tommy worked patiently to reprogram her instincts, using a combination of heavy bag work, speed drills, and carefully controlled sparring sessions to help her trust her natural power again. "Your body knows how to fight," Tommy reminded her during particularly frustrating training sessions. "The problem is that your mind has been trained to expect failure. We need to overwrite 18 months of false programming with authentic experience." The process was exhausting mentally and physically, requiring Maya to essentially relearn skills she'd already mastered while fighting against deeply ingrained expectations of weakness. Jake Morrison became her primary sparring partner during this reconstruction phase, his size and experience making him ideal for testing Maya's rediscovered abilities. The first time she dropped him with a clean right hook during light sparring, Both fighters stood in stunned silence for several seconds. Jake had been holding back significantly, but Maya's punch had still landed with enough force to buckle his knees and send him searching for the ropes. "I wasn't ready for that," Jake admitted, shaking his head to clear the cobwebs. "Maya, that punch would have knocked out half the middleweights I know. Where the hell has this been hiding?" The question haunted Maya as much as it intrigued her training partners. She'd always possessed the speed, timing, and technique necessary for devastating combinations, but the sabotaged equipment had prevented her from experiencing the full effects of her natural ability. Detective Chun's investigation during this period revealed disturbing details about the scope of equipment tampering throughout Chicago's amateur boxing scene. Laboratory analysis of Maya's original gloves showed sophisticated engineering designed to absorb and disperse impact energy while maintaining the appearance of standard protective gear. The modification required specialized knowledge of both boxing equipment and material science, suggesting involvement by people with advanced technical expertise. The powder found in Maya's gloves was identified as a proprietary, shock-absorbing compound typically used in military applications and high-end athletic equipment. Its presence in amateur boxing gear represented a significant financial investment, indicating that someone with substantial resources had specifically targeted Maya for sabotage. The question of why a relatively unknown fighter would warrant such elaborate manipulation remained frustratingly unanswered. Chun's interviews with other fighters in Maya's weight class revealed a pattern of suspicious equipment gifts and mandatory gear inspections that coincided with Commissioner Mitchell's increased involvement in amateur boxing administration. Several fighters reported receiving specialized gloves, mouthguards, or protective gear that had allegedly been designed to improve their performance, but which seemed to correlate with subsequent declines in their fighting effectiveness. Amy Foster's experience provided the most compelling parallel to Maya's situation. Foster had received custom mouthguards from Mitchell's office 6 months earlier, ostensibly to address dental protection concerns raised during a routine medical examination. Since beginning to use the modified equipment, Foster's previously effective jab had become noticeably weaker, and her ability to finish combinations had deteriorated significantly. "I thought I was just having a bad streak," Foster explained during a private conversation with Maya and Chun. "Boxing has slumps, you know. But looking back, the decline started exactly when I began using their equipment. I just never made the connection because who would expect that level of deliberate sabotage in amateur sports?" Laboratory testing of Foster's mouthguard revealed micro-perforations designed to reduce jaw stability during impact, effectively diminishing the power transmission from her body to her punches. The modification was so subtle that it would be virtually impossible to detect without specialized equipment, yet sophisticated enough to significantly impact fighting performance over extended periods. Maya's anger at the discovery of Foster's sabotage was complicated by relief that she wasn't the only victim. The systematic nature of the equipment tampering suggested a coordinated effort to control outcomes across multiple fighters, which meant the conspiracy was larger and more organized than anyone had initially suspected. It also meant that Maya's experiences weren't the result of personal vendetta, but part of a broader criminal enterprise. Tommy's connections throughout Chicago's boxing community proved invaluable for identifying additional victims of equipment tampering. Veteran trainers began sharing stories of promising fighters who'd inexplicably lost their power or effectiveness after receiving equipment from official sources. The pattern was consistent: young fighters with significant potential would be targeted for special attention from boxing officials, receiving customized gear that ultimately undermined their natural abilities. Carlos Rodriguez, Maya's younger brother, had been quietly conducting his own investigation into the family's financial struggles during Maya's losing streak. As a 16-year-old with limited resources, his methods were unconventional but effective. Carlos had been tracking betting patterns at local sportsbooks, noting unusual activity around his sister's fights that suggested insider knowledge about likely outcomes. "Maya, people were betting serious money against you in fights where you should have been favored," Carlos explained, showing her handwritten notes and betting slips he'd collected from various sources. "I'm talking about odds that made no sense based on your training and preparation. Someone knew you were going to lose before you even stepped in the ring." The betting analysis provided crucial context for understanding the financial motivations behind Maya's sabotage. Large sums of money had been consistently wagered against her by a network of individuals with connections to both legitimate sports betting operations and underground gambling rings. The profits from these bets were substantial enough to justify significant investment in equipment modification and conspiracy coordination. Marcus Thompson's deeper analysis of the betting data revealed algorithmic precision in the timing and magnitude of wagers placed against Maya and other tampered fighters. The betting pattern suggested computer-assisted analysis of fight scheduling, opponent matching, and equipment distribution designed to maximize return on investment while minimizing detection risk. The sophistication indicated involvement by people with backgrounds in both organized crime and data analytics. Maya's mother, Rosa, had been quietly worried about her daughter's boxing career for months, but not for the reasons Maya expected. Rosa's work as a hospital cleaner had given her access to conversations between medical staff about unusual injury patterns among local amateur boxers. Several fighters had been treated for repetitive stress injuries that didn't match their reported training routines, suggesting equipment-related problems that doctors were struggling to diagnose. "I started paying attention when 3 different boxers came in with similar hand injuries in the same month," Rosa explained during a family dinner, where Maya finally shared the truth about her sabotaged equipment. The doctors were confused because the injuries looked like impact damage, but the fighters all said they'd been having trouble generating power in their punches. It didn't make sense medically. The medical records Rosa had observed provided additional evidence of the conspiracy's scope and sophistication. Equipment tampering wasn't just affecting fight outcomes, it was causing actual physical harm to fighters, whose bodies were compensating for artificially dampened impact feedback. Several fighters had developed chronic problems with their hands, wrists, and shoulders as they unconsciously overcompensated for equipment that prevented normal force transmission. Dr. Richard Stone, the physician responsible for many of them boxing medical examinations Rosa had overheard, became a person of interest in Chun's investigation. Stone's involvement in approving specialized equipment and his financial connections to individuals in Kozlov's organization suggested a medical component to the conspiracy that extended beyond simple fight manipulation. Stone was potentially facilitating equipment tampering under the guise of fighter safety and performance enhancement. Maya's decision to continue boxing, despite the revelation of systematic sabotage, was influenced by conversations with other affected fighters who'd chosen different paths. Some had quit the sport entirely, too disillusioned to continue competing in what they now viewed as fundamentally corrupt. Others had attempted to expose the corruption through official channels, only to encounter bureaucratic resistance and implicit threats that discouraged further investigation. Foster's experience with trying to report her suspicions through proper channels proved particularly instructive. When she'd approached Mitchell's office with concerns about her equipment, she'd been told that questioning officially approved gear could result in suspension from amateur competition, pending investigation of her allegations. The threat was subtle, but clear: fighters who caused problems would find themselves excluded from the sport entirely. "They've created a system where victims can't complain without destroying their own careers," Foster explained to Maya during a training session where both fighters worked with verified legitimate equipment. "The fighters who need boxing the most, people like us from working class families, can't afford to rock the boat because we don't have other options. It's psychological." control as much as physical manipulation. The realization that the conspiracy relied on victims, silence, and economic vulnerability added another layer to Maya's growing understanding of how the system worked. The sabotage wasn't just about individual fights, it was about maintaining control over a population of athletes who depended on boxing for economic survival and social mobility. Fighters were being systematically prevented from achieving success while being made complicit in their own exploitation. Tommy's contacts in the legitimate boxing establishment provided disturbing confirmation that similar corruption existed in other cities and regions. Equipment tampering, fight fixing, and betting manipulation were apparently widespread problems that official oversight bodies were either unable or unwilling to address effectively. Maya's situation was part of a national pattern of exploitation that targeted the most vulnerable participants in amateur and professional boxing. The scope of the problem was simultaneously overwhelming and motivating for Maya. On one hand, the conspiracy seemed too large and entrenched to combat effectively. With the limited resources available to a working-class fighter and her allies. On the other hand, the systematic nature of the exploitation meant that exposing it could potentially help hundreds of other fighters who were currently being victimized without their knowledge. Chun's investigation had attracted federal attention due to the interstate nature of the betting operations and equipment sourcing involved in the conspiracy. FBI agents specializing in organized crime had begun monitoring individuals in Kozlov's network, gathering evidence for potential racketeering charges that could dismantle the entire operation. Maya's cooperation would be crucial for building a case strong enough to secure convictions against high-level conspirators. Maya's training during this period became increasingly focused on preparing for real competition rather than the artificial limitations she'd grown accustomed to. Tommy designed workout routines that emphasized power development and combination finishing, skills that had been systematically suppressed during her months of using sabotaged equipment. The physical conditioning was demanding, but the psychological adjustment remained the greater challenge. "You're going to have to trust yourself in ways you haven't for 18 months, Tommy warned during particularly intense training sessions. "Your instincts have been telling you that your punches don't hurt people, but that was a lie. When you step into the ring with legitimate equipment against an opponent who doesn't know about your real power, you need to be prepared for a completely different kind of fight." The prospect of returning to competition with her natural abilities restored was both exciting and terrifying for Maya. She'd grown accustomed to tactical approaches that compensated for her artificially limited power, developing defensive skills and endurance that would serve her well in future fights. Combined with her rediscovered knockout ability, these compensatory skills could potentially make her far more dangerous than she'd ever been during her early amateur career. Part 3. The false narrative Commissioner James Mitchell stood behind. The polished podium at the Chicago Athletic Commission's monthly press conference, his silver hair perfectly groomed and his expression radiating the confidence of someone accustomed to controlling narratives. The assembled sports reporters had gathered primarily to discuss upcoming amateur tournaments and regulatory changes, but Mitchell had specifically requested time to address what he termed concerning rumors about equipment irregularities in local boxing. "Ladies and gentlemen, it has come to our attention that certain individuals have been spreading unfounded allegations about the integrity of our equipment approval processes," Mitchell began, his voice carrying the authoritative tone that had made him effective in administrative roles for over a decade. "These claims are not only false, but represent a dangerous attempt to undermine confidence in amateur boxing safety protocols." Mitchell's preemptive strike against the equipment tampering allegations demonstrated sophisticated understanding of crisis management and media manipulation. By framing the concerns as attacks on fighter safety rather than legitimate questions about corruption, he positioned himself as a protector of amateur athletes while discrediting potential accusers as reckless. troublemakers willing to compromise boxer welfare for personal gain. The press conference had been hastily arranged after Mitchell learned through administrative channels that Detective Chun was asking questions about equipment approval procedures and fighter medical records. Sources within the police department, some of whom had financial relationships with individuals in Kozlov's network, had provided advance warning that allowed Mitchell to begin damage control before formal accusations could be made public. Viktor Kozlov watched the press conference from his luxury office overlooking Chicago's downtown skyline, surrounded by the trappings of legitimate business success that concealed his extensive criminal enterprises. Kozlov's empire extended far beyond boxing into construction, real estate, and entertainment ventures that provided numerous opportunities for money laundering and influence peddling. Boxing was just one component of a diversified portfolio that had made him wealthy and politically connected. Mitchell handled that well, Kozlov commented to Tony Marconi, his primary liaison for sports betting operations. But we need to accelerate our timeline. If Chun's investigation gains federal attention, we'll need to eliminate evidence and witnesses before they can build a case. The casual discussion of eliminating witnesses reflected the violent reality underlying what appeared to be sophisticated white-collar crime. Kozlov's organization had spent years building relationships with officials throughout Chicago's sports establishment, using a combination of bribery, blackmail, and legitimate business partnerships to ensure cooperation with their various schemes. Mitchell's cooperation had been secured through gambling debts and compromising photographs, while Dr. Stone's participation was motivated by substantial payments, disguised as consulting fees for equipment evaluation services. The public response to Mitchell's press conference was largely supportive, with most sports media accepting his explanations about enhanced safety protocols and dismissing equipment tampering allegations as conspiracy theories propagated by unsuccessful fighters looking for excuses. The boxing establishment's closing of ranks around Mitchell demonstrated the effectiveness of institutional capture and the difficulty of challenging corruption from within affected systems. Maya watched the press conference from Iron Heart Gym with a mixture of anger and fascination at Mitchell's skilled manipulation of the narrative. The commissioner's confident denials and appeals to fighter safety were convincing enough that even some people who knew about the equipment tampering began questioning whether they'd misunderstood the situation. Mitchell's performance was a masterclass in gaslighting that made Maya appreciate the psychological sophistication of the conspiracy she was fighting. Tommy's reaction to the press conference was more visceral, informed by decades of experience with boxing politics and administrative corruption. That son of a bitch is good, Tommy admitted grudgingly. He's not just denying the allegations, he's making anyone who questions him look like they hate fighter safety. Classic misdirection that puts us on the defensive while he controls the conversation. Detective Chin recognized Mitchell's press conference as confirmation that her investigation was proceeding in the right direction. Corrupt officials rarely held preemptive press conferences unless they felt threatened by legitimate inquiries. Mitchell's specific denials also provided useful information about which aspects of the conspiracy he was most concerned about protecting, giving Chun guidance for focusing her limited investigative resources. The boxing community's response to Mitchell's statements was divided along predictable lines. Established trainers and promoters with relationships to the commission generally supported Mitchell's position, while younger fighters and independent coaches were more skeptical. The division reflected broader power dynamics within amateur boxing that favored institutional stability over accountability and reform. Amy Foster's parents contacted local media outlets after the press conference, attempting to share their daughter's experience with sabotaged equipment and the physical injuries it had caused. Their efforts were largely unsuccessful, with reporters either dismissing their claims as unsubstantiated or referring them to the commission for comment. The institutional bias toward official sources over individual complainants effectively silenced potential whistleblowers. Carlos Rodriguez's informal network of young boxing enthusiasts began documenting their own observations about suspicious patterns in local amateur competition. Their efforts lacked the sophistication of Chun's official investigation, but their insider perspective and freedom from institutional constraints allowed them to gather information that professional investigators might miss. Carlos's generation of fighters had grown up with social media and data analysis tools that older conspirators hadn't anticipated. Mitchell's success in controlling the initial narrative created dangerous overconfidence within Kozlov's organization about their ability to weather the investigation. The positive media response to the press conference encouraged them to believe that their institutional protections were sufficient to deflect serious scrutiny. This overconfidence would prove to be a significant tactical error that created opportunities for their opponents. Dr. Stone used the cover provided by Mitchell's press conference to accelerate his disposal of evidence related to equipment modification and fraudulent medical evaluations. Stone's medical practice had been the coordination point for many aspects of the conspiracy, providing scientific legitimacy for equipment changes while creating paper trails that justified unusual modifications. His destruction of records was systematic but not entirely successful. Maya's family received anonymous phone calls following Mitchell's press conference, with callers suggesting that Maya should focus on her boxing career rather than pursuing distractions that could damage her future prospects. The calls were not explicitly threatening, but their timing and content made clear that Maya's activities were being monitored by people with significant resources and reach. Rosa Rodriguez's concerns about her daughter's safety intensified as the conspiracy's response to exposure became more aggressive. Rosa had grown up in neighborhoods where challenging powerful interests could result in serious consequences for entire families. Her protective instincts conflicted with her pride in Maya's courage and determination to fight for justice, creating emotional tension that affected the entire Rodriguez household. The Chicago Tribune's sports section published a feature article about Mitchell's reforms to amateur boxing safety protocols, presenting the commissioner as an innovative leader working to modernize an antiquated sport. The article made no mention of equipment tampering allegations and portrayed critics as nostalgic traditionalists resistant to necessary changes. The positive coverage was the result of careful media management by Kozlov's organization. Federal investigators monitoring Kozlov's communications noted increased activity and urgency in discussions about cleaning up loose ends and protecting investments. The surveillance provided valuable intelligence about the conspiracy's structure and priorities, but also revealed the potential danger facing witnesses and whistleblowers who had begun cooperating with law enforcement authorities. Maya's return to serious training with legitimate equipment was progressing rapidly, but the psychological effects of 18 months of artificial limitation remained significant. Her improved performance in sparring sessions was dramatic enough to attract attention from other fighters and trainers, raising questions about what had changed in her preparation and technique. The attention was unwelcome given the ongoing investigation and safety concerns. Mitchell's administrative control over amateur boxing in Chicago allowed him to influence fight scheduling, opponent selection, and venue assignments in ways that could either help or harm Maya's comeback attempt. His power to effectively end her boxing career through bureaucratic means represented a significant threat that required careful navigation. Maya needed to continue competing to maintain her credibility and gather evidence, but each fight carried risks beyond normal athletic competition. The false narrative established by Mitchell's press conference created a framework that would influence public perception of future developments in the investigation. By positioning himself as a reformer and safety advocate while painting critics as irresponsible conspiracy theorists, Mitchell had established terms of debate that favored his organization's interests. Overcoming this narrative advantage would require compelling evidence and strategic communication that could penetrate institutional bias. Judge Patricia Wells, one of the referees who had officiated several of Maya's suspicious losses, quietly began distancing herself from situations that might attract scrutiny. Wells had been a willing participant in outcome manipulation, but her involvement was limited enough that she might escape serious consequences if the conspiracy was exposed. Her self-preservation instincts led her to begin documenting her interactions with Mitchell and Kozlov as potential insurance against future prosecution. The success of Mitchell's narrative management demonstrated the importance of controlling information flow and framing in corruption cases. Kozlov's organization had learned from other exposed scandals that public perception often mattered more than legal facts in determining ultimate consequences. Their investment in media manipulation and institutional relationships was paying dividends in protecting their operations from serious disruption. Maya's growing understanding of the conspiracy's sophistication and reach was both educational and intimidating. The network of corruption extended far beyond simple fight fixing into areas of medicine, law enforcement, media, and politics that seemed impossible for a young fighter to challenge effectively. Yet the same systematic approach that made the conspiracy powerful also created vulnerabilities that could be exploited by determined opponents with limited resources but superior motivation. Part 4. Underground Transformation. Maya's metamorphosis from naive victim to strategic fighter began in the basement of Iron Heart Gym, where Tommy had created an unofficial training facility for fighters who needed to prepare away from the scrutiny of official boxing circles. The basement was equipped with heavy bags, speed equipment, and sparring gear that had been independently verified as legitimate, creating a secure environment where Maya could develop her rediscovered abilities without fear of further sabotage. The physical transformation was remarkable but expected given Maya's natural talent and 18 months of suppressed potential. More significant was her psychological evolution from someone who accepted authority without question to a fighter capable of strategic thinking about corruption and institutional manipulation. Maya began studying not just boxing technique, but the broader context of sports politics, criminal enterprise, and investigative procedures that would be necessary for exposing the conspiracy effectively. Detective Chun's unofficial mentorship proved invaluable during this transformation period. Chun shared insights about criminal investigation methods, evidence gathering, and legal procedures that helped Maya understand how to document suspicious activities and protect herself from retaliation. The detective's guidance transformed Maya from a passive victim gathering random information into an active intelligence collector capable of gathering legally useful evidence. "You need to think like both a fighter and an investigator now," Chun explained during one of their clandestine meetings in Lincoln Park. "Fighters react to immediate threats and opportunities, but investigators think systematically about building cases that can survive legal scrutiny. You're uniquely positioned to gather evidence that law enforcement couldn't obtain through traditional methods, but only if you approach it strategically." Maya's new identity required careful construction to allow her continued participation in amateur boxing while protecting her investigation activities. She began presenting herself as a reformed fighter who had overcome personal problems through better training and coaching, deflecting questions about her improved performance while gathering intelligence about other potentially compromised fighters and officials. The basement training facility became a gathering place for fighters who suspected they'd been victimized by equipment tampering or fight manipulation. Tommy's reputation for integrity and Maya's willingness to share her experience created a safe space where athletes could discuss suspicious incidents without fear of official retaliation. These informal meetings generated valuable intelligence about the scope and methods of the conspiracy. Marcus Thompson's involvement expanded beyond data analysis to include technical consultation about evidence gathering and digital security. Thompson helped Maya and her allies understand how to document suspicious activities using methods that would produce legally admissible evidence while protecting their identities and safety. His expertise in computer forensics was particularly valuable for analyzing electronic communications and financial records. Maya's sparring sessions with Jake Morrison became increasingly sophisticated as both fighters adapted to her restored power and developing tactical awareness. Jake's experience with higher-level competition provided valuable preparation for the challenges Maya would face when she returned to official amateur competition. Their training partnership also created cover for discussing investigation strategies and sharing intelligence about suspicious activities in the broader boxing community. The underground nature of Maya's preparation was necessitated by the conspiracies, extensive surveillance and influence within official boxing channels, normal training facilities, sanctioned sparring sessions, and traditional preparation methods were all potentially compromised by people with connections to Kozlov's organization. Maya's team needed to operate outside normal structures while maintaining the appearance of conventional training routines. Carlos Rodriguez's role in the investigation expanded as his informal network of young fighters provided access to information and perspectives that adults couldn't obtain. Carlos's generation was more comfortable with digital communication and social media investigation than their older counterparts, allowing them to gather intelligence about betting patterns, equipment distribution, and administrative irregularities through methods that weren't monitored by traditional surveillance. Amy Foster's parallel investigation into her own sabotage provided valuable collaboration opportunities and emotional support for Maya's transformation. Foster's experience with attempting to work through official channels had taught her important lessons about institutional resistance to accountability that helped Maya avoid similar mistakes. Their shared experience created a bond that transcended normal training partnerships. Maya's mother, Rosa, became an unwitting intelligence asset through her hospital work, which provided access to medical records and professional conversations that revealed the health consequences of equipment tampering. Rosa's observations about injury patterns among local fighters helped establish the medical evidence that would be crucial for building criminal cases against the conspiracy participants. The transformation of Maya's fighting style reflected both her restored physical capabilities and her developing understanding of the strategic dimensions of her situation. Instead of simply trying to win fights, Maya began thinking about how to gather evidence during competition while positioning herself for maximum impact. When the conspiracy was eventually exposed, her boxing became a form of investigative theater, designed to advance multiple objectives simultaneously. Tommy's connections throughout the legitimate boxing establishment provided crucial intelligence about normal administrative procedures and equipment standards that helped Maya's team distinguish between routine irregularities and systematic corruption. His decades of experience also provided historical context about how similar conspiracies had operated in other times and places, informing strategic decisions about evidence gathering and exposure timing. Maya's developing investigative skills extended beyond boxing into broader areas of criminal enterprise and corruption that helped her understand Kozlov's organization as part of larger patterns of organized crime. She began studying money laundering, political corruption, and racketeering cases to understand how successful prosecutions were built and what evidence would be most valuable for exposing the conspiracy. The basement training facility's informal atmosphere facilitated conversations and relationship building that would have been impossible in official settings. Fighters, trainers, and supporters who might normally be separated by competitive rivalries or institutional hierarchies could collaborate on understanding and combating the systematic exploitation they all faced. Maya emerged as a natural leader in this community despite her youth and limited experience. Chen's investigation benefited significantly from the intelligence Maya's network provided, But the detective was careful to maintain official procedures and legal standards that would allow eventual prosecution of the conspiracy participants. The collaboration between formal law enforcement and Maya's underground investigation required careful coordination to avoid compromising either effort, while maximizing their combined effectiveness. Maya's physical conditioning during this period emphasized not just boxing performance, but the stamina and resilience that would be necessary for sustained investigation and potential confrontation with dangerous criminals. Her training included elements of self-defense, situational awareness, and stress management that reflected the reality that her activities extended far beyond normal athletic competition. The secrecy surrounding Maya's transformation created additional psychological pressure, as she was forced to maintain multiple identities and relationships while managing the emotional stress of knowing about systematic corruption that affected numerous other fighters. The isolation required for security purposes conflicted with her natural inclination toward community and shared purpose. Maya's relationship with her family evolved as they became more involved in understanding and supporting her investigation activities. The Rodriguez family's working-class background and immigrant experience provided valuable perspective on institutional corruption and the importance of fighting for justice despite personal risks. Their support became crucial for Maya's psychological resilience during increasingly difficult circumstances. The underground network that emerged around Maya's transformation included people from various backgrounds and professions who had been affected by different aspects of Kozlov's criminal enterprise. This diversity provided resources and expertise that would not have been available within the boxing community alone, creating an informal coalition capable of challenging corruption across multiple sectors. Maya's emerging leadership role required her to balance her personal desire for justice against her responsibility for other people's safety and well-being. The decisions she made about investigation strategy and exposure timing would affect not just her own career and safety, but the lives of numerous other fighters, their families and community members who had trusted her with their stories and cooperation. Part 5. The Revelation. The breakthrough that would ultimately expose the entire conspiracy came through an unexpected source: Dr. Richard Stone's computer, which Marcus Thompson accessed during a carefully planned operation that exploited the physician's predictable schedule and inadequate digital security. Stone's medical practice had served as the central coordination point for equipment tampering, fraudulent health evaluations, and documentation that legitimized the conspiracy's activities within official boxing channels. Thompson's forensic analysis of Stone's hard drive revealed thousands of emails, financial records, and technical documents that detailed the scope and sophistication of the equipment tampering operation. The evidence showed that Stone's practice had been modifying protective gear for over 3 years, affecting more than 200 fighters across multiple weight classes and competition levels. The systematic nature of the sabotage was staggering in its breadth and precision. Maya's first review of the evidence was overwhelming in its implications for her own career and the broader boxing community. The documents showed that she had been specifically targeted not because of personal animosity, but because her fighting style and background made her an ideal test case for equipment modifications. Her combination of technical skill and economic vulnerability made her perfect for demonstrating that even naturally talented fighters could be neutralized through subtle sabotage. The financial records revealed the economic scale of the conspiracy, with betting profits from manipulated fights generating millions of dollars for Kozlov's organization over the past 3 years. The money was laundered through legitimate businesses and invested in expanding the corruption network to include officials in other cities and states. Maya's fights had generated relatively modest profits individually, but her consistent losses had contributed to establishing credibility for larger betting operations. Commissioner Mitchell's communications with Stone and Kozlov demonstrated His central role in identifying targets for equipment tampering and coordinating administrative cover for suspicious activities. Mitchell had used his official position to mandate equipment inspections, schedule medical evaluations, and implement policy changes that facilitated the conspiracy, while appearing to enhance fighter safety and competitive integrity. The technical specifications for equipment modifications were particularly disturbing in their sophistication and attention to detail. Stone's organization had developed multiple methods for reducing fighting effectiveness without causing obvious equipment failures or injuries that might prompt investigation. The modifications were designed to be virtually undetectable by fighters or trainers who weren't specifically looking for sabotage. Maya's emotional response to seeing the detailed planning that had gone into undermining her career was complicated by relief that her struggles hadn't been the result of personal inadequacy or lack of effort. The documents showed that even elite fighters with superior training and natural ability would have been similarly affected by the equipment modifications. Her resistance to complete demoralization, despite months of engineered failure, was actually evidence of exceptional mental toughness. Detective Chun's review of the evidence confirmed that it provided sufficient grounds for federal racketeering charges against Kozlov, Mitchell, Stone, and numerous other conspiracy participants. The electronic communications demonstrated criminal intent, coordination across state lines, and systematic fraud that met legal standards for organized crime prosecution. The challenge would be protecting the evidence and witnesses long enough to build formal cases. Tommy's analysis of the fighter targeting criteria revealed disturbing patterns based on socioeconomic background, family circumstances, and personal characteristics that made individuals vulnerable to exploitation without effective recourse. The conspiracy had deliberately focused on fighters from working class families with limited educational opportunities and minimal connections to legal or political resources that might challenge their treatment. The evidence showed that Amy Foster and several other female fighters had been targeted specifically because women's boxing received less media attention and official oversight than men's competition. The gender bias in sports coverage created opportunities for systematic manipulation with reduced risk of public exposure or institutional accountability. Marcus Thompson's deeper analysis of the betting data revealed connections to organized crime operations in multiple cities, suggesting that Chicago's boxing corruption was part of a national network of sports manipulation and gambling fraud. The scope of the criminal enterprise extended far beyond what Maya's team had initially suspected, involving hundreds of participants across numerous states and sporting contexts. Maya's role in the conspiracy became clearer as the evidence revealed that her sabotage had been used as a proof of concept for equipment modifications that were subsequently applied to fighters in other cities and sports. Her 18 months of engineered failure had essentially served as product testing for corruption techniques that were being marketed to criminal organizations throughout the country. The revelation that her suffering had contributed to the exploitation of other athletes created additional motivation for Maya to ensure that the conspiracy was completely exposed and its participants prosecuted to the full extent of the law. Her personal quest for justice had evolved into a broader mission to protect vulnerable athletes from systematic exploitation by people who viewed sports as opportunities for criminal profit rather than legitimate competition. Dr. Stone's notes revealed the medical rationalization he had developed for participating in the conspiracy, convincing himself that the equipment modifications were actually protecting fighters from serious injuries by reducing the force of impact during training and competition. His self-deception demonstrated how intelligent people could become complicit in systematic fraud through gradual moral compromise and financial incentives. The documents included correspondence with equipment manufacturers who had been unknowingly producing modified gear based on Stone's specifications, believing they were developing enhanced safety equipment for amateur athletics. The manufacturers Innocents created additional victims of the conspiracy while providing cover for the criminal modifications through legitimate business relationships. Maya's understanding of the conspiracy psychology was enhanced by communications that revealed how the participants had convinced themselves that they were improving amateur boxing by removing unpredictable elements that made the sport dangerous for young fighters. Their rationalization transformed criminal exploitation into paternalistic protection, allowing them to maintain positive self-image while systematically defrauding athletes and fans. The evidence revealed that Judge Patricia Wells and other officials had been gradually recruited into the conspiracy through financial incentives and social pressure rather than direct criminal solicitation. The corruption had spread through professional relationships and economic dependency that made resistance increasingly difficult as individuals became more deeply involved in illegal activities. Viktor Kozlov's communications demonstrated sophisticated understanding of law enforcement techniques and legal vulnerabilities that had informed the conspiracy's operational security measures. His organization had studied previous sports corruption cases to develop methods for avoiding detection and minimizing legal exposure, while maximizing criminal profits through systematic fraud. Maya's team realized that the evidence they had obtained was sufficient to destroy the conspiracy, but also dangerous enough to place all of them at significant personal risk. The decision about when and how to expose the corruption would require careful coordination with law enforcement authorities and strategic consideration of public exposure methods that would protect witnesses while ensuring maximum impact. The scope of the evidence was both empowering and overwhelming for Maya, who had begun her journey seeking personal justice for 18 months of engineered failure, but now held information that could reform amateur boxing and protect countless future athletes from similar exploitation. Her transformation from victim to investigator was complete, but her mission was just beginning. Chun's assessment of the evidence confirmed that Maya's team had gathered material that exceeded what law enforcement could have obtained through traditional investigative methods. The collaboration between formal police work and Maya's underground investigation had produced a comprehensive case that could result in significant criminal convictions and systematic reform of amateur boxing oversight. The revelation phase concluded with Maya's team possessing overwhelming evidence of systematic corruption, but facing the challenge of exposing it safely and effectively while the conspiracy participants remained powerful and dangerous. The next phase would require transitioning from investigation to public action, with all the risks and opportunities that such exposure would entail. Part 6. Parallel Investigation. Detective Lisa Chun's official investigation had reached a critical juncture, where federal involvement became necessary to pursue the conspiracy across state lines and jurisdictional boundaries. The evidence gathered through Maya's underground network exceeded what traditional police work could have accomplished, but it needed to be integrated with formal law enforcement procedures to ensure successful prosecution. Chun's challenge was convincing federal authorities to take the case seriously while protecting the sources and methods that had made the investigation possible. FBI Special Agent David Kruger arrived in Chicago on a cold February morning with a reputation for dismantling organized crime operations and a skeptical attitude toward local police claims about sophisticated criminal enterprises. Kruger's initial meeting with Chun was professional but distant, reflecting federal law enforcement's tendency to view local investigations as potentially compromised or inadequately resourced for complex cases involving multiple jurisdictions and technical evidence. The presentation of Stone's electronic records transformed Kruger's attitude from skeptical cooperation to intense interest. The FBI agent's experience with racketeering cases allowed him to immediately recognize the legal significance of the communications between Kozlov, Mitchell, and their various co-conspirators. The betting records and equipment modification Documentation provided exactly the type of systematic evidence that federal prosecutors needed for successful organized crime convictions. Chun's careful explanation of Maya's role in gathering evidence created a delicate situation where the FBI needed to work with civilian investigators who had used methods that wouldn't normally be acceptable in federal cases. Kruger's solution was to treat Maya's team as confidential informants whose information could guide official investigation while maintaining legal standards for evidence collection and witness protection. Maya's transition from underground investigator to federal informant required significant adjustments in how she approached evidence gathering and personal security. The FBI's involvement brought professional resources and legal protection that her informal network couldn't provide, but it also imposed restrictions and procedures that limited her operational flexibility. The balance between official support and investigative freedom would prove crucial for the investigation's ultimate success. Marcus Thompson's technical expertise became invaluable for federal investigators who needed to understand the sophisticated equipment modifications and digital evidence that formed the core of the criminal case. Thompson's ability to explain complex, technical concepts in terms that prosecutors and juries could understand made him an essential witness for any eventual trial proceedings. The federal investigation scope expanded rapidly as Kruger's team discovered connections between Chicago's boxing corruption and similar operations in Detroit, Cleveland, and St. Louis. The interstate nature of the conspiracy transformed what had appeared to be local sports corruption into a national organized crime investigation with implications for amateur athletics across multiple sports and regions. Amy Foster's cooperation with federal investigators provided crucial corroboration for Maya's experiences while demonstrating the systematic nature of the equipment tampering operation. Foster's medical records and documented performance decline created compelling evidence that the conspiracy had caused measurable harm to multiple athletes over extended periods. Her willingness to testify publicly, despite personal risks, strengthened the case significantly. Tommy Williams found himself in the unusual position of serving as a bridge between Chicago's legitimate boxing community and federal law enforcement officials who needed to understand the sport's culture and operational procedures. Tommy's reputation for integrity and his extensive knowledge of boxing politics made him an invaluable resource for investigators who needed to distinguish between normal competitive irregularities and systematic criminal manipulation. The federal investigation revealed that Kozlov's organization had been using boxing corruption as a proving ground for techniques that were subsequently applied to other sports, including amateur wrestling, mixed martial arts, and even some professional athletics. The boxing conspiracy was apparently just one component of a diversified criminal enterprise that specialized in sports manipulation for gambling profits. Carlos Rodriguez's informal network of young fighters became an important intelligence source for federal investigators who needed current information about ongoing corruption activities. The teenagers' social media connections and informal communication channels provided access to real-time information about suspicious equipment distributions, unusual fight scheduling, and betting pattern anomalies that older investigators might miss. Dr. Stone's medical practice was placed under federal surveillance as investigators worked to gather additional evidence about equipment modification procedures and identify other medical professionals who might be involved in similar conspiracies. The surveillance revealed ongoing criminal activity that provided opportunities for real-time evidence collection and witness identification. Maya's family required federal protection as the investigation progressed, and the conspiracy participants became aware that their activities were under systematic scrutiny. Rosa Rodriguez's hospital employment made her particularly vulnerable to retaliation, while Carlos's youth and informal investigation activities created additional security concerns that required careful management. The federal investigations resources allowed for sophisticated financial analysis that traced money flows between Kozlov's legitimate businesses and the criminal enterprises that generated profits from sports manipulation. The financial evidence revealed a complex network of shell companies, offshore accounts, and legitimate investments that had been used to launder millions of dollars in illegal gambling profits. Commissioner Mitchell's administrative records became the focus of intense federal scrutiny as investigators worked to understand how official boxing oversight had been systematically corrupted. Mitchell's correspondence revealed a pattern of policy changes and procedural modifications that had facilitated equipment tampering while appearing to enhance fighter safety and competitive integrity. The federal investigation attracted media attention that created both opportunities and risks for Maya's team. Positive coverage could generate public support for reform efforts and pressure on officials to address systematic corruption. But premature exposure could also compromise ongoing investigative activities and endanger witnesses who hadn't yet been provided adequate protection. Judge Patricia Wells became a potential cooperating witness as federal pressure mounted, and her limited involvement in the conspiracy made her a candidate for plea negotiations rather than lengthy prison sentences. Wells's insider knowledge of how fight outcomes were manipulated through officiating decisions provided valuable evidence about operational procedures and participant recruitment methods. Maya's continued training and competition during the federal investigation served multiple purposes, including maintaining her credibility as an active fighter, gathering ongoing intelligence about corruption activities, and preparing for eventual public testimony that would require her to withstand intense scrutiny from defense attorneys and media organizations. The federal investigation's timeline became increasingly urgent as evidence suggested that Kozlov's organization was planning to expand their operations into other regions, while potentially eliminating witnesses and evidence that could threaten their criminal enterprise. The race between federal law enforcement and criminal damage control would determine whether the conspiracy could be fully exposed and prosecuted. Chun's role evolved from local detective to federal task force coordinator as her original investigation became the foundation for a much larger law enforcement operation. Her understanding of the case's origins and her relationships with key witnesses made her indispensable for federal prosecutors who needed to present a coherent narrative that juries could understand and accept. The parallel investigation structure that emerged combined Maya's continued underground intelligence gathering with federal law enforcement's official evidence collection and legal procedures. This collaboration created unprecedented opportunities for exposing systematic sports corruption while requiring careful coordination to avoid compromising either investigative approach. Marcus Thompson's analysis of betting patterns revealed that the conspiracy had been testing more sophisticated manipulation techniques that could potentially affect professional sports and major gambling markets. The implications extended far beyond amateur boxing into areas of national economic and security concern that elevated the Kingston investigation's priority within federal law enforcement. Maya's psychological preparation for eventual public testimony required her to develop skills for handling hostile questioning, media scrutiny, and personal attacks that defense attorneys would likely use to discredit her credibility. The transition from underground investigator to public witness would test her resilience and commitment in ways that physical training couldn't prepare her for. The federal investigation's success would ultimately depend on the cooperation and courage of witnesses like Maya, who had risked their personal safety to gather evidence about systematic corruption. The partnership between civilian investigators and law enforcement demonstrated how ordinary citizens could play crucial roles in exposing organized crime when supported by adequate resources and legal protection. Part 7. The Strategic Planning. The coordination meeting between Maya's team and federal investigators took place in a secure conference room at the FBI's Chicago field office, where the convergence of underground intelligence and official law enforcement created an unusual but powerful collaboration. Agent Kruger had assembled a task force that included prosecutors, technical specialists, and organized crime experts who would be responsible for transforming Maya's evidence into successful criminal cases against the conspiracy participants. Maya's role in the strategic planning process was complicated by her dual identity as both a key witness and an active participant in ongoing intelligence-gathering operations. The federal team needed her continued access to boxing community information, while ensuring that her activities didn't compromise legal procedures or endanger prosecution prospects. The balance between operational security and investigative effectiveness required careful navigation by all participants. The evidence from Dr. Stone's computer had provided a foundation for the case, but prosecutors needed additional corroboration and real-time criminal activity to strengthen their charges against high-level conspiracy participants. Maya's continued involvement in amateur boxing competitions offered opportunities to document ongoing corruption while building relationships with other potential witnesses who could provide crucial testimony. Marcus Thompson's technical analysis had revealed that the equipment tampering operation was far more sophisticated than initially suspected, involving multiple manufacturers, distribution networks, and quality control procedures that ensured consistent results across different fighters and competition venues. The systematic nature of the sabotage required equally sophisticated law enforcement responses that could address all aspects of the criminal enterprise. Federal prosecutors outlined their strategy for building racketeering cases against Kozlov, Mitchell, and other high-level participants while pursuing cooperation agreements with lower-level conspirators who could provide insider testimony about operational procedures and decision-making processes. The prosecution strategy would require extensive witness preparation and protection measures that could extend for months or years after initial arrests. Maya's upcoming fight schedule became a crucial element in the federal investigation's timeline, as her continued competition provided cover for intelligence gathering while creating opportunities to document ongoing criminal activity. The FBI's surveillance resources would be coordinated with Maya's boxing activities to maximize evidence collection while ensuring her personal safety during increasingly dangerous circumstances. Detective Chun's local law enforcement perspective proved valuable for understanding the political and community dynamics that would affect the investigation's success and public reception. Her experience with Chicago's boxing establishment provided insights into potential resistance points and collaboration opportunities that federal investigators might otherwise overlook. The strategic planning process revealed that the conspiracy's reach extended into areas of local government, business licensing, and regulatory oversight that had facilitated years of criminal activity without detection. The comprehensive nature of the corruption required federal intervention to overcome institutional resistance and ensure that systemic reforms could be implemented effectively. Amy Foster's parallel case provided a template for how other affected fighters could be identified, interviewed, and potentially recruited as witnesses for the prosecution effort. Her medical records and documented equipment sabotage created compelling evidence that could be replicated with other victims who might not yet realize they had been systematically exploited. Tommy Williams' gym became an unofficial headquarters for witness coordination and evidence-gathering activities, with federal surveillance providing security while maintaining the appearance of normal boxing training operations. The gym's reputation for integrity made it a natural gathering place for fighters and trainers who were concerned about corruption but uncertain about how to address it safely. The federal team's resources allowed for sophisticated financial investigation techniques that traced the flow of illegal gambling profits through Kozlov's legitimate business enterprises and identified additional participants who had benefited from the sports manipulation conspiracy. The financial evidence would be crucial for demonstrating the scale and systematic nature of the criminal enterprise. Maya's family required comprehensive security, assessments and protection measures as their involvement in the investigation became more extensive and visible to conspiracy participants. Rosa Rodriguez's hospital employment provided both vulnerabilities and opportunities for intelligence gathering that needed to be carefully managed to ensure family safety while maintaining investigative effectiveness. Carlos Rodriguez's informal network of young fighters evolved into a valuable intelligence asset for federal investigators who needed current information about equipment distribution, fight scheduling, and betting activities that could indicate ongoing criminal operations. The teenagers' social media activity and informal communications provided real-time intelligence that traditional surveillance methods might miss. The strategic planning revealed that successful prosecution would require not just criminal convictions, but also systematic reforms to amateur boxing oversight that could prevent similar conspiracies from developing in the future. The federal team included policy specialists who would work with sports organizations and regulatory bodies to implement enhanced transparency and accountability measures. Commissioner Mitchell's administrative position provided him with advance warning about federal investigation activities through his official connections to law enforcement and regulatory agencies. The strategic planning had to account for Mitchell's potential access to sensitive information while developing methods for limiting his ability to obstruct justice or intimidate witnesses. Dr. Stone's medical practice continued to operate under federal surveillance, providing opportunities to gather additional evidence about ongoing equipment modification activities while identifying other medical professionals who might be involved in similar conspiracies. The medical component of the conspiracy required specialized expertise that federal investigators were still developing. The timeline for public exposure of the conspiracy became a critical strategic consideration as federal investigators balanced the need for thorough evidence collection against the risks of allowing ongoing criminal activity to continue. Maya's team advocated for more rapid public disclosure, while federal prosecutors preferred extended investigation periods that could strengthen eventual criminal cases. Maya's continued training and competition required careful coordination with federal surveillance and evidence collection activities to ensure that her boxing activities supported rather than compromised the investigation objectives. Her natural fighting ability, combined with legitimate equipment, made her increasingly formidable in amateur competition while providing cover for intelligence-gathering operations. The strategic planning process identified key decision points where the investigation could either succeed spectacularly or fail catastrophically, depending on tactical choices and timing considerations. The collaboration between Maya's underground network and federal law enforcement created unprecedented opportunities, but also unique vulnerabilities that required careful management. Judge Patricia Wells' potential cooperation with federal investigators offered significant opportunities for insider testimony about fight manipulation procedures, but her limited criminal exposure also made her a flight risk who might disappear rather than face prosecution. The federal team developed contingency plans for securing Wells' cooperation through both incentives and pressure. The strategic planning revealed that Kozlov's organization had been using Chicago's boxing corruption as a testing ground for expansion into other cities and sports, making the federal investigation crucial for preventing the spread of systematic sports manipulation throughout amateur athletics. The national implications elevated the case's priority and resources while increasing pressure for successful outcomes. Maya's psychological preparation for her role as a key federal witness required specialized training in handling hostile cross-examination, media scrutiny, and personal attacks that defense attorneys would use to discredit her testimony. Her credibility as a witness would be crucial for prosecution success, making her preparation a critical component of the overall strategic plan. Part 8. The infiltration. Maya's return to official amateur boxing competition served as both personal vindication in federal intelligence operation as she entered the Midwest Golden Gloves tournament in Detroit, where evidence suggested Kozlov's organization had expanded their equipment tampering conspiracy. The tournament provided perfect cover for federal surveillance, while giving Maya opportunities to interact with potentially compromised fighters and officials from multiple cities. The transformation in Maya's fighting ability was immediately apparent to anyone familiar with her previous performances, but her carefully constructed narrative attributed the improvement to enhanced training methods and psychological breakthroughs, rather than the removal of sabotaged equipment. Her first fight ended with a devastating second-round knockout that sent shockwaves through the amateur boxing community and attracted exactly the type of attention her team had anticipated. Federal agents positioned throughout the Detroit venue documented suspicious interactions between officials who had connections to Chicago's corrupt network, while Maya's performance provided compelling evidence of how equipment tampering had artificially suppressed her natural abilities. The contrast between her current devastating power and her previous reputation for weak punching created exactly the type of dramatic narrative that would be crucial for explaining the conspiracy to juries and the public. Tommy Williams accompanied Maya to Detroit as her official trainer while secretly coordinating with federal surveillance teams and technical specialists who were monitoring communications and documenting evidence of ongoing criminal activity. Tommy's reputation in boxing circles provided access to conversations and information that federal agents couldn't obtain through traditional investigative methods. The tournament's medical examination procedures became a focus of intensive federal scrutiny as investigators worked to identify other physicians who might be involved in equipment modification conspiracies, similar to Dr. Stone's Chicago operation. Maya's submission to standard medical protocols provided cover for federal specialists to analyze examination procedures and equipment approval processes for signs of systematic manipulation. Marcus Thompson's technical expertise proved invaluable for analyzing the equipment approval and distribution systems used at the Detroit tournament, identifying irregularities and potential manipulation points that could indicate ongoing criminal activity. His background in computer forensics allowed him to gather digital evidence about equipment sourcing and administrative procedures that strengthened the federal case against the conspiracy. Maya's interactions with other fighters revealed disturbing patterns of performance problems and unexplained equipment issues that suggested the conspiracy's reach extended far beyond Chicago's amateur boxing scene. Several fighters from different cities reported similar experiences with mysteriously weakened punching power and equipment, gifts from officials that coincided with performance declines. The betting activity surrounding Maya's tournament appearance was monitored by federal financial crime specialists, who documented unusual patterns that indicated insider knowledge about her restored abilities. The betting data provided crucial evidence about the conspiracy's ongoing operations while revealing additional participants who had been profiting from sports manipulation activities. Amy Foster's presence at the tournament as part of Maya's support team allowed for discreet conversations with other female fighters, who might have been targeted for equipment sabotage because of the reduced scrutiny typically applied to women's amateur boxing competitions. Foster's willingness to share her own experiences encouraged other fighters to discuss suspicious incidents that might otherwise have been dismissed as normal competitive setbacks. The tournament's officiating crew included several referees and judges who had connections to Chicago's corrupt network, providing opportunities for federal surveillance teams to document ongoing criminal coordination and communication patterns. The officials' behavior during Maya's fights was carefully monitored for signs of outcome manipulation or communication with external betting interests. Detective Chun's coordination with Detroit law enforcement provided local context and resources that enhanced the federal investigation's effectiveness, while ensuring that evidence collection activities didn't interfere with legitimate tournament operations. Her experience with sports corruption cases proved invaluable for interpreting observed behaviors and identifying potentially significant interactions. Maya's devastating knockout victories attracted media attention that served federal investigation objectives while raising her profile as a legitimate championship contender. The positive coverage provided cover for her continued involvement in amateur boxing, while building public interest in her story that would eventually support broader exposure of the conspiracy. Carlos Rodriguez's informal intelligence network had expanded to include young fighters from multiple cities who provided real-time information about suspicious equipment distributions, unusual administrative activities, and betting pattern anomalies that indicated ongoing criminal operations. The teenagers' social media connections created an intelligence collection system that traditional law enforcement methods couldn't replicate. The tournament experience revealed that equipment tampering was just one component of a comprehensive sports manipulation system that included officiating corruption, medical fraud, and betting coordination designed to maximize criminal profits while minimizing detection risks. The systematic nature of the corruption required equally comprehensive law enforcement responses that addressed all aspects of the criminal enterprise. Federal surveillance teams documented extensive communication between tournament officials and individuals with known connections to organized crime operations, providing real-time evidence of ongoing criminal coordination that strengthened prosecution prospects. The communications revealed operational details and decision-making processes that would be crucial for understanding and proving the conspiracy structure. Maya's hotel room was equipped with federal recording equipment that captured conversations with other fighters, trainers, and officials who provided valuable intelligence about corruption activities in their home cities and regions. The informal conversations revealed the scope of the conspiracy, while identifying additional witnesses who could potentially provide crucial testimony. Dr. Stone's absence from the Detroit tournament was noted by federal investigators who had hoped to document his involvement in equipment modification activities outside of Chicago. His careful avoidance of situations that might attract scrutiny indicated awareness of federal investigation activities and sophisticated operational security measures within the conspiracy. The tournament's equipment inspection procedures were carefully documented by federal specialists who identified multiple points where sabotaged gear could be introduced into the competition without detection by normal oversight measures. The analysis provided crucial technical evidence about how the conspiracy operated, while suggesting improvements to equipment security protocols. Maya's psychological state during the tournament reflected the complex pressures of serving as both a competitive athlete and a federal informant in potentially dangerous circumstances. Her ability to maintain peak performance while gathering intelligence and managing personal security concerns demonstrated remarkable resilience and commitment to justice that impressed federal investigators and prosecutors. Commissioner Mitchell's influence extended to the Detroit tournament through his professional relationships and administrative connections, allowing him to monitor Maya's activities and potentially interfere with federal investigation objectives. The federal team developed countermeasures to limit Mitchell's access to sensitive information while documenting his attempts to obstruct justice. The infiltration phase concluded with Maya's tournament victory, providing perfect cover for extensive intelligence gathering that revealed the national scope of the sports manipulation conspiracy while positioning her for continued investigation activities. The federal team had gathered substantial evidence about ongoing criminal operations, while establishing Maya's credibility as both a legitimate fighter and a reliable witness for future prosecution efforts. Part 9. The Pursuit Sequence, the Aftermath of Maya's devastating tournament performance in Detroit triggered an immediate and aggressive response from Kozlov's organization as they recognized that their carefully constructed conspiracy was unraveling. Within hours of her final knockout victory, Maya began receiving anonymous phone calls warning her to remember her place and suggesting that her improved performance might be temporary. if she continued attracting unwanted attention to amateur boxing's administrative procedures. Federal surveillance teams documented increased activity among conspiracy participants as they scrambled to assess the damage from Maya's public demonstration of her restored abilities and implement damage control measures. The communications revealed panic among lower-level participants and urgent meetings between high-level conspirators who recognized that their years of profitable sports manipulation were under serious threat. Maya's return trip to Chicago became a carefully orchestrated federal operation as Agent Kruger's team balanced the need to protect their key witness against the investigative value of allowing Kozlov's organization to reveal their capabilities and operational procedures through their response to perceived threats. The delicate balance between witness safety and evidence gathering required split-second decision-making and sophisticated coordination. The pursuit began in earnest when Maya's flight was delayed due to mechanical problems that federal investigators quickly determined were the result of sabotage designed to strand her in Detroit, where local criminal associates could more easily monitor her activities or potentially eliminate her as a threat. The discovery of the sabotage attempt provided crucial evidence of conspiracy to obstruct justice while demonstrating the organization's willingness to use violence. Tommy Williams found himself under increased surveillance and subtle intimidation as Kozlov's organization attempted to pressure Maya through people close to her. His gym received anonymous complaints to city inspectors about safety violations. His business insurance was mysteriously canceled, and several of his longtime clients began training elsewhere after receiving warnings about their trainer's involvement in dangerous activities. Federal protection for Maya's family intensified as intelligence indicated that Rosa Rodriguez's hospital employment was being used to monitor the family's activities while creating opportunities for retaliation that would appear to be random criminal activity rather than targeted intimidation. Carlos Rodriguez's school attendance was monitored by federal agents after reports of suspicious individuals asking questions about his schedule and activities. Marcus Thompson's technical expertise became crucial for identifying and countering sophisticated electronic surveillance that Kozlov's organization deployed against Maya's team. The federal investigation revealed that the conspiracy had access to advanced surveillance technology and computer intrusion capabilities that indicated connections to criminal organizations with national or international resources. Detective Shun's local law enforcement resources proved invaluable for identifying and neutralizing immediate threats against Maya while maintaining the appearance of normal police activity that wouldn't reveal the scope of federal protection measures. Her understanding of Chicago's criminal landscape allowed for tactical decisions that kept Maya safe while avoiding actions that might compromise ongoing investigation activities. The pursuit phase revealed previously unknown aspects of Kozlov's criminal empire, including connections to human trafficking, drug distribution, and political corruption that extended far beyond sports manipulation. The federal investigation's scope expanded rapidly as agents discovered that boxing corruption was just one component of a diversified criminal enterprise with international connections and sophisticated operational capabilities. Amy Foster became a secondary target for intimidation as Kozlov's organization recognized her potential value as a witness and attempted to discourage her cooperation through harassment of her family and interference with her employment. Federal protection was extended to Foster and other potential witnesses as the conspiracy's response became increasingly desperate and violent. Maya's continued training at Iron Heart Gym required extensive security measures as federal agents worked to maintain the appearance of normal boxing preparation while protecting against potential attacks or sabotage attempts. The gym became an unofficial federal staging area with concealed surveillance equipment and emergency response capabilities that could be activated if threats materialized. The financial pressure campaign against Maya's allies intensified as Legitimate businesses found themselves subjected to regulatory investigations, insurance cancellations, and banking difficulties that appeared to be random. Administrative problems, but were actually coordinated attacks designed to isolate Maya from her support network. Federal investigators documented these activities as additional evidence of conspiracy and obstruction of justice. Commissioner Mitchell's attempts to use his official position to discredit Maya and her allies became increasingly desperate as he implemented new administrative policies designed to exclude her from competition, while portraying her improved performance as evidence of prohibited performance enhancement or training violations. His obvious bias provided additional evidence of official corruption while strengthening Maya's credibility as a victim of systematic persecution. Dr. Stone's medical practice came under intensified federal surveillance, as investigators suspected he might be preparing to flee the country or destroy additional evidence that could strengthen prosecution cases. His communications revealed connections to criminal organizations in other countries that provided offshore banking and identity modification services for conspiracy participants who needed to disappear. The pursuit sequence demonstrated Kozlov's organization's extensive infiltration of legitimate institutions, including law enforcement, regulatory agencies, and political organizations that had previously been assumed to be beyond criminal influence. The discovery of institutional corruption required federal investigators to operate with extraordinary security measures while working to identify trustworthy allies within compromised systems. Maya's psychological resilience was tested severely as the pressure campaign intensified and she realized the full scope of the criminal organization she was challenging. The threats against her family and friends created emotional stress that affected her training and competition preparation, while federal psychologists worked to help her maintain focus and determination despite increasingly dangerous circumstances. The media attention surrounding Maya's dramatic improvement as a fighter created additional complications as reporters began investigating her story and potentially uncovering federal investigation activities before law enforcement was prepared for public exposure. The federal team worked carefully to manage information flow while building public support for eventual prosecution efforts. Carlos Rodriguez's informal intelligence network became a valuable early warning system for detecting threats against Maya and her family while providing real-time information about conspiracy activities throughout Chicago's amateur boxing community. The teenager's social media monitoring capabilities proved superior to traditional law enforcement surveillance for identifying emerging threats and operational changes. Judge Patricia Wells' decision to seek federal protection in exchange for cooperation provided crucial insider testimony about fight manipulation procedures while revealing additional participants who hadn't previously been identified by investigators. Her cooperation marked a significant breakthrough in the federal case while demonstrating cracks in the conspiracy solidarity as pressure mounted. The pursuit phase concluded with Kozlov's organization's response, revealing their true capabilities and criminal reach while providing federal investigators with extensive evidence of ongoing crimes that strengthened prosecution prospects. Maya's survival of the intimidation campaign demonstrated her commitment to justice while positioning her for the dramatic public exposure that would ultimately destroy the conspiracy and reform amateur boxing oversight. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.